Worksession-ZCO.
Okay.
Mike Chadwick, internal audit.
Bethel signed SAP Synergy Project.
Part WCIO for application systems.
And there's Rose.
And we went.
Thank you, Rose. Well, Zig, we'll turn the time over to you.
Sure. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Okay, hopefully, Ellie, have you been able to open that up now?
I'm about to open it.
Okay, great. So we'll just start. It's the standard sort of format that we've been using. So we'll talk a little bit about the activity on the Synergy project. We'll kind of remind ourselves of that functional view of the Synergy system. Talk about the pause, give an update with regard to project governance, and then some conclusions from ZCO. In terms of activity, as of 9/24, and this is a repeat from last month, just kind of a reminder that in essence we're halfway through with the blueprint. So at any point in time when we decide to pick back up again, in essence we have about half the blueprint to finish, which is the design, if you will. The time management requirements sub-project is still a key dependency for the Synergy project and needs to get completed. It is moving along just fine. Now, I refer to the blueprint, the Blue Ribbon Advisory Committee has now met 4 times. They're doing quite well, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. The Executive Steering Committee has been reestablished, and that's good. There hasn't been any meetings of the Executive Steering Committee since July or the new administration. The Functional Steering Committee for Synergy, is starting up its weekly meetings again after a 2-week hiatus. So that, I think it's this afternoon, isn't it? Okay. So we're referring to the file artifacts. Artifacts is an SAP term. We're going to talk a little bit about what those artifacts are. But because the main activity is all about internal people reviewing and approving, that activity has been going on, and that's a good thing in the sense of trying to keep things moving. So that's going on as well. This is a reminder. This was actually presented at the end of the blueprint activity, or at the end of the activity and at the beginning of the pause. And it's a reminder that we've got 67 FILO, or the financial aspects. 67 of those artifacts or documents are sitting there waiting to be reviewed and approved. That process is going on. And I wanted to at least kind of remind us as to what does it mean that we talk about the blueprint documents. So there are business organizational structure documents, there are enterprise role definition documents, master data documents, organizational impact, process definition, and process flows. So there's a lot of different kinds of things that are going on, but that represents what they're doing when they're doing the blueprint. Any questions about that?
Jim?
Okay.
Nope.
The main grouping of financial documents, this is kind of the status of where they are as of the last week, I guess, this past current week. And so you can see that they've got 10 approved out of the 52 they're looking at, but they're supposed to have 10 more done today. So that would be 20, so they're in essence 50% complete, round numbers, and the indication is that they will have all of them reviewed and approved next week, which is a good thing.
Did you say the team is still working?
This is I think what Zig is referring to here. Even though we're pausing, we don't have consultants working because we stopped. We're taking the opportunity to try to get those 67, which is down into this smaller group, still to keep internally working on those and getting them finalized. So.
Okay.
This is what he's referring to right here, but there's no consultants working on this.
Okay. Let the minutes reflect we've added Pete Peterson to our meeting. Welcome, Pete.
Good morning. Shall I continue?
Absolutely, sir.
Okay. So this is kind of an indication that yes, we do have some folks still doing some work. We need to recognize that there are some folks that are allocated full-time to the Synergy activity, which includes, of course, Alden, as we know, Deputy CIO, which is Kim, and then we have a full-time project admin or assistant that's dedicated to this process, and that they are continuing on keeping some things active and going. Again, as Alden said, not spending any money for consultants, but we do have some activities going on because the Synergy project needs to go on. Whatever the solution may be is another question. We do have some contractors that are helping out, but we're not paying them, which is also a good thing.
But they're using the rooms we rented, aren't they?
They are in the.
So we're
Sunshine-
technically still
they're in the
expending
Sunshine-
cash.
They're in the Sunshine Building, and they're in the leased apartments that we have. The middle group, however, the time management, the 4 of those 5 are local people, so they would be at their, in their houses. So the 3 SAP consultants, one of the requirement ones, and any of the data management ones that are up here are in the apartments that we have rented in the Sunshine Building. And I would also add that the last group, the data management team of 4, those are at no charge as well.
Anything, LB?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to make one comment that, the consultants are working for free, and the cash that was spending is cash that was committed before this new group started. I just want to make that point. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Anything from you guys? Go ahead, Sig.
That was a shake of my hand. in case-
So,
Sorry.
this is a reminder, we talked about this last month in terms of what did the functional view of synergy look like in March. So this is a reminder of what we talked about there, and it's just to make sure we recognize that we've got, in essence, a financial core group of products or systems, if you will, applications. We have a human resources group, and then we also have some budget preparation, budget management, and we also have some timekeeping. So that was sort of the functional view, which no matter who the solution is, you're still going to have to come up with those functions. So let's talk a little bit about the pause, and I'm going to come back to that functional view in just a second. So this is the outline that the committee is working on, that they will, as I understand it, in fact, Alden mentioned yesterday, they are promising to have that finished by next Wednesday, the 30th. Shortly thereafter, presumably it will go to the mayor, and then shortly after that, it will presumably come to the assembly.
Even shorter.
I want the time very small between going to the mayor and coming to the assembly, sir.
I will do the best I can.
Thank you. Sorry, Zig.
So they're going to have a typical executive summary, and they're going to talk about the alternatives considered. They are going to recap some history of Synergy and where it stands. Then they have quite a few pages of detailed recommendations, and they also included a comparison for some implementations. So that's what's actually going on and what they're working on.
And if I could just add.
Go ahead, Alvin.
They've spent a lot of time both in meetings as well as their personal time outside working on this. So I just want to, we'll acknowledge them as well, but the 7 that have been on this project from the very beginning took it very seriously, and they spent a lot of time, both personal and during their work weeks to be able to do this. So I think you're going to be pretty happy with the quality of the report when it comes out.
Sometime in October, I'd like to do a semi-recognition of the 7 people involved. So get us the names, if you would, please, because it would be good to recognize their efforts.
They've done a lot.
Thank you. Go ahead, Zig.
Okay. We've said this before, but we want to make sure we remind everybody that there are still some very important decisions that the organization needs to make in terms of what direction the organization is going to go with regard to its new Synergy system. And they are there, that we keep repeating them, but we need to make sure that we have not set those aside. We can't let that hit or sit around. And so I think it's important to remind ourselves that this whole issue of time management, whether or not we're going to be using Kronos, we need to put that to bed. No matter what the decision, which software product is involved, we really need to figure that one out. We need to figure out this whole data conversion migration strategy, which is being worked on. That's a good thing. But the issue of the granularity of project inception to date data has been sitting around for a year. I mean, it makes no sense that we continue to say that that's undecided. We really need to figure that one out and put it to bed. Fortunately, I think the committee is going to come out with some recommendations regarding that.
Good, Zig, because if I remember correctly, SAP, as the new versions come out, are going to require you to use their file system, aren't they?
That's the whole concept. That's the whole question about the infrastructure question of what platform you're going to use. Absolutely, that needs to be resolved. I mean, it needs to be concur, and people need to realize this is the direction we're going to go. Again, whichever solution it is. But that is an important one, okay?
Anything, gentlemen?
Now,
Go ahead, Zig.
Are we okay?
Yeah, we're fine, Zig.
Okay, a new one came up, and I think it's important to hear this and realize this. You know, the administration, the team has identified a design gap. So, you know, during all of the design activities and the thinking and trying to figure out what functionality we need to have, apparently there has the enterprise content management capabilities have not been included in the design. Okay? Which means that, you know, as you put in a new complex large system and you start realizing that you're going to have a tremendous amount of paperwork, it would make some sense for you to have some approach to how you're going to manage and control, monitor and use, access, review, annotate all that paperwork. Okay? It makes all kinds of sense. Should it be there? Absolutely it should be there. Okay? But it's not included in the blueprint as of today. Okay? It's not included in terms of budget requirements for the software. And certainly it has not, the estimates for any kind of implementation for that has not been considered. So that's a net add.
Zig, what type of money are we talking about?
That's unfair.
Well, you brought it up.
Well, you need to buy some software, okay, and I'm sure that it's going to be multiples of 100,000, so whatever that may be. And then you're going to probably have to think in terms of doing some design work. That's going to be a couple of people for a few months, couple months. And then you're going to have to do the implementation, which is going to stretch out about as long as your other implementation. I'll show you that in a second. So
Alden?
The administration is going to have to come up with some kind of an estimate.
You guys working on this?
Well, it was identified by Kim, which is, I think, a very important part of this entire thing. This shows where, you know, the cart before the horse kind of thing. We're diving into this, and some of these things should have been identified years ago, and as we're going into them now. If I had to take a guess, you're probably looking between 500 to 750,000 all in servers, hardware, scanners, software, as was mentioned, people to come up and blueprint, diagram, all this kind of stuff. But as Zig was mentioning, you know, we are in a paper environment, and what are you going to be doing with all that paper as it comes in, and how are you going to attach it to all your work invoices and your birth records and all those pieces of paper that employees bring and vendors bring in? How are we going to manage that? And when you're just looking at an ERP system, that's a really critical component, because otherwise your database just keeps growing, and you end up in the same situation we have right now, where you start having functional operational issues where your system is so large and you haven't purged it or you haven't designed it such that now you have structural issues that you're trying to deal with. So it's been identified. It's an area that we've actually even demoed again for a second time yesterday. We have options that are available, and it's unfortunately, however, as you see, you have SAP, and then you have all of these other major projects, data warehousing, and that are also important to the success of the overall ERP. But it's not just the SAP version or software, and that's what I would hope that you would understand, is that when we're tackling this, we've actually got 4 or 5 highly integrated systems and processes that all are around your ERP, but all critical for the success of that program, or the SAP system, or ERP system in that case, will end up being very similar in what has happened with PeopleSoft. It just gets loaded and so on. But that would be my estimate.
Mr. Steele?
Yeah, tell me if my concept was right. You've got the system, and the system has capabilities. First, you have to decide what capabilities you're going to buy and use, which you aren't. And then it seems to me the goal ought to be to get rid of the paper and to go electronic. Take advantage of the options in the program that we want to use in terms of data analysis.
The last 4 years, what the concept was from the Muni was to take, let's say, an invoice piece of paper, and they were going to attach it and keep it in SAP, and they were just going to keep it there, and you wouldn't be able to sort on it or search for it, and they would just expand the database. That was the concept. So as we're putting forward right now, it's not really a good business practice to have that happen, because as you can see, that the speed and the functionality of the system starts deteriorating as it gets so large. So this is a way of trying to get that information or those documents off of there, still be able to search for them and have access to them as you need them, but not affect your core system that you absolutely have.
Otherwise, you have tons of file cabinets
And it has
and
to
space
process
and people to
all of those
process.
things to be able to do that.
It
And
seems to me the goal ought to be to try to get rid
It's
of.
unfortunate that it's taken us 4 years to get to the conclusion that we need an option, but that's another one of these areas, Chairman, that we are wrapping our minds around during this pause, and we have to seriously consider this.
I'm sure the school district will
Your
take,
advisory committee is going to take a stand regarding this.
Good.
It will be included in their
Kim
recommendation.
can speak a little bit more, because she needs,
I'd like to add one other comment to that. We're looking at it as a broader context, because right now, I mean, the smell, it doesn't have any content
Anywhere.
at all. And you have people with files in their hard drive, and shared drive, and paper.
Bottom drawer.
The file drawers, people are taking papers around to get signed. It's really an extremely expensive process and a bad process.
18th century
Yes.
procedures.
So my perspective is that we're looking at how much we'll scope it so that we're looking at what type of documents need to be supported with the SAP transactions or the ERP transactions, but look at the broader context, like what is a bigger demand that the meeting has, because there's a huge demand beyond SAP users.
Sure.
And so what we're going to come forward with is a look at, if we go with a SAP recommended solution, how much can it accommodate the rest of the meeting's business with documentation. So it's not just an SAP solution, it's a much broader solution.
I just want to highlight one thing.
Go ahead, Alden.
That I mentioned. We always talk about SAP and synergy, but there are several other major projects, major initiatives that have to go along with that. This is one, the data warehousing and archiving is one, time management with Kronos is the one. So we're trying to wrap our hands around all of these ancillary things. They all do relate to the ERP and the whatever system we're going to, but they're almost like separate projects in and of themselves. So when you hear us talking about some of these things, they're all going to be critical for the success of the ERP system.
Yes.
They all tie to it. But to be honest, they're almost an entire project in and of themselves, each individual one. Some are a little bit longer, some are not. But we've actually got 4 or 5 ERP kind of tasks or projects going on all at the same time that we're trying to ramp back up here. And it's my personal opinion, after being here a little over a month, this is some of the reasons why the failures of the past implementations, because these are all critical functions that the ERP system you have to plan out and document and design, or it's not going to be able to be successful for your end system. And now we're really trying to evaluate those as well.
oh, then when you talk to San Diego, the lady down there, CFO, would you ask them how they dealt with this issue? I'm interested in how they dealt with it.
Sure.
Do we
Pete?
need, sorry.
Tim?
Do we need to
Sorry.
look at it all at this time, or do we select the critical components and then deal with these outliers, add them in as we gain experience with the...
Well, they're different. For example, the data warehousing and reporting, you have to have that, because what are we going to bring over from the PeopleSoft to the ERP system, and then how are we going to get the information out? That's kind of tagged along. This particular one can certainly be scalable. I mean, we don't have to have everybody doing it, but you would certainly like to you have to make sure you plan for it, blueprint it, make sure the system has it. Maybe you start with invoicing, or maybe you start with the HR or ER side and do, like I said, marriage licenses and birth certificates and that kind of stuff. You can scan it out, but you gotta plan for it up front so that you can incorporate your core system to be able to handle that functionality.
Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so, if I'm understanding this correctly, no matter which ERP system we use, whether we continue with SAP or buy another one, we're still going to have this gap we have to...
Or you end up having your
Yeah.
system just getting going bigger, because all your stuff is residing there. Yes, sir.
Because, as we've said, or certainly I've said it several times, you want to complete this blueprint. I mean, that's your design.
Yeah.
You really do want to do that. And it should include, in this particular case, it should include enterprise content.
And it's going to cost more.
I mean, in terms of designing it, so.
Already has.
Ms. Gray Jackson, anything?
No, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Zig.
So, we've said that before, that one of the design directional decisions is resolving data management reporting, which is exactly what Alden was just now discussing. And the last item, continues to be, you need to resolve whether or not you're going to have a systems integrator, or are you going to continue being the general contractor? And that's something that, you probably definitely should work on, but you've got some time, because you can probably get that resolved as you are completing the blueprint. Again, that matters not which solution you may be using. So some good news is the committee should have their report ready for the administration by 9:30, that's next Wednesday. That they are currently developing the detailed recommendations, and in addition to the core question they're supposed to be addressing is, should you or should you not continue with SAP? If you don't continue with SAP, what alternatives should you be looking at? That they're also addressing several of those directional decisions. They are going to be discussing their suggestions with regard to the continued use of Kronos. That's a good thing. That's going to help quite a bit, I think. Outsourcing the synergy processing, another question that's a directional decision that they're going to at least opine on. The enterprise content management design gap, we just said that, and they are going to address the systems integrator question as well in terms of their recommendations. Okay.
Questions? Good, Zig.
Okay, now let's come back to this functional view. Now, some of the terms up here happen to be SAP terms, but this is what, now all of a sudden, how has this functional view changed? Okay, so if you'll notice that I've kind of moved the realization, project preparation, and blueprint part A over to the left here to give myself some room, because in essence, the pause is creating a delay. It's creating a delay. Okay, so here's the pause, whatever it means. I mean, in terms of timeline, if it's the end of September or several more weeks as we go through the process of the mayor and you guys and so forth, that's going to happen. But at some point in time, we're going to have to ramp up. That's going to take time. Okay, I mean, we've already talked about that fact. No matter what, again, it doesn't matter what solution it is, if it's SAP or something else, you still got to ramp up. Okay. And so that's going to take some time. So in essence, what's happening is that pushes the completion of the blueprint. Okay, that pushes the completion of the blueprint. So at this point in time, when you finish the blueprint, whatever solution, you're still going to have a financial series of applications. You're still going to have some human resources applications. Guess what? We just added enterprise content management. Okay, because of its breadth of scope. It's going to sit here and be involved as well throughout. Those all still have to be there. The change that's not on your document, and I apologize, I had originally put an X here, and it's not like it's going away. Budget preparation and management is not going to go away. It just gets deferred. It needs to follow financial and HR, so that you can actually generate the data from prior year information, so you can generate your budgets for the coming year. Okay, but from an assembly perspective, I think you need to be figuring out, you need to decide, am I going to include that in the budget for synergy? Because I don't think it is today, although you have already purchased the software. You already have the SAP software for the budget piece. What's it called?
Public budget.
Public budget management? Formulation. Okay. PBF. Yeah, PBF, there you go. I'm going to call that something else, I'm sure. But anyway, so you already own the software, but I'm not sure that you've got a budget request from the administration that says, this is how long it's going to take and this is what it's going to cost for implementation. Okay? And it's not inconsequential. Okay, if you're talking about the SAP solution, you're talking a minimum of 6 to 8 months, maximum 12 months. Okay, so it's not inconsequential. And as soon as you start saying 12 months, then you can immediately see, well, where am I going to put that in my budget preparation cycle? When do I go live with that thing so I can use it for the next budget cycle? So you're going to get into some very interesting conversations about the timing of that. Okay. Right?
Yeah.
But it is basically being pushed out to say it starts after the other three. Okay?
Okay.
Now, I've got those questions down there. Those continue to be those questions of what do you do about Chronos? What do you do about your software infrastructure? What do you do about where do you run it? You know, these are the HEC and the HANA kinds of things that have been bubbling around. But like I say, the advisory committee is going to address some of that, and that's a good thing. I mean, it will give the mayor and you and the assembly, it will give you both some good input, I think. Okay? So regardless of direction, whether you go SAP or whether you go something else, the blueprint should definitely be completed, no matter what. Okay? The ramp up to restart Synergy will require some significant time, and it will be even more, that ramp up will be even longer if you decide to do something other than SAP. If the administration decides to do something other than SAP. So we need to recognize that. The other thing we got to remind ourselves is that HR needs to go live on a quarter. Tax reporting, all those kinds of things come into play. So if you push your go live by 1 month, you in essence push it by 3 because you've got to go to the next quarter for HR. Okay? Any restart approaching a major year-end, I'm talking about right now, the restart of getting going on Blueprint again, we got to recognize that you're coming up on the holiday period. And that's the reason why it's going to drag out, because you're coming up on that holiday period, ramping up, it's going to be difficult. You're going to find yourself into November. How many weeks of productive work are you going to get in November because of the Thanksgiving holiday? And then, of course, you also have, as soon as you get into December, you have the winter holidays, Christmas, whatever term you wish to use. That usually, most organizations at best get 2 weeks of productive work in December. So you got to realize that. And so therefore, I think you have a high probability of that blueprint dragging out because of the ramp up and the resourcing issues that, and so forth. So we got to be real careful about that. And you also are going to have CAFR and year-end happening to you in January, February, March. So those happened before. Okay, so most likely, I'm suggesting
So you can't do it. That's what you're saying.
Well, most likely, I'm suggesting that, assuming that sometime in the next 2, 3, 4 weeks, you get decisions made, you start to ramp up, most likely you're not going to finish your blueprint until the end of the first quarter of 2016. Okay, and remember that at one point in time, we were all hoping that, planning that the blueprint would finish in late October, early November. It's looking like end of the first quarter. Now, there's going to be variations in time and so forth, but you've added some stuff with regard to ECM. Presumably there's going to be a decision about how you're handling timekeeping, so you're going to have to add some time to take care of all the timekeeping and so forth. So I'm just saying that that's the case, and if that's the case, realize that if you did make the statement that it's going to take a year for something after blueprint, you can already start seeing where your end target date goes. In other words, I would suggest to you any thoughts of January 2017 is probably very optimistic. Okay?
What's wrong?
I'll be retired.
And no matter the direction, and I'm basically saying no matter the direction, whether it's SAP or something else. And I'd like to talk a little bit about project governance. Here's a series of slides that were presented to you in February of 2015. These were all about project governance. Suggestions with regard to the Executive Steering Committee, suggestions with regard to the Functional Steering Committee. And I just think there's been a couple of things that happened in the last couple of months. I mean, the Executive Steering Committee didn't really operate because of the transition of the administration. Functional Steering Committee, kind of took some time off because of the pause. I'm basically suggesting to you they really need to keep going. They need to keep going because, as Alden has mentioned, this thing is fairly broad. It's not just SAP. It's all about data warehousing, reporting, enterprise content management. I mean, it's this whole slew of things that talk about the whole functional aspect of everything necessary for the municipality. So in my mind, those groups need to keep moving, they need to keep doing what they're supposed to do at their levels. So you'll notice that some of the things in terms of suggestions for the enterprise, for the executive steering committee were done. Some were not, okay? And they basically, so I'm just simply saying, here's the functional steering committee. We said you need to have a charter. Well, the charter didn't really happen until about 6 months later. They became too granular. In many cases, there are, in terms of the meetings and the membership, there were an awful lot of executive sessions in the last 6 months or 4 months. The PMO, there were quite a few suggestions about PMO. There was partial concurrence to those suggestions with regard to the PMO, but then in the last 2 months or so before the pause, PMO kind of fell into disuse. So we had talked about some PMO membership. It wasn't, what we recommended was not really followed. It was partial, okay? So in terms of the governance progress and what's going on, I think the good news is those 2 governance committees are being reinstituted. I think that's great. And I'm still a little worried about this fact that we don't have a PMO active and moving, even though there's a pause, because there are a lot of other things happening. There's a lot of other pieces to this, as Alden mentioned, that in my mind you can bring that together if you've got a PMO working on it. So conclusions, the steering committee should be reestablished and they should be meeting monthly. The functional steering committee should restart meeting weekly, so issues and concerns regarding the activity that's going on during the pause are addressed. There's the list. Functional steering committee ought to be taking its shot at every one of those. And I'd sure love to see the functional steering committee once and for all to agree to how in the world are you going to convert your project inception to date data. I mean, that continues to sit out there undecided, and I cannot understand why that happens. I would suggest you restart this energy project PMO. They ought to meet weekly, and then you ought to be adding project managers as you add sub-projects. I mean, I understand that you don't necessarily need the various project managers that you had there before because you're on a pause, but you've got all this other stuff going on that they probably should be communicating. They should be meeting and they should be having sessions with each other as they talk about the various other components. Okay, so that the data management piece ought to be communicated, and I understand that those are being communicated on a one-on-one basis. I understand that, but I'm talking about it from a group perspective. Does that make sense?
Questions?
Okay.
Thank you, Zig.
I just want to make sure from a conclusion perspective, please understand the pause will create a synergy project delay, and it's go live. It's going to happen. And the question is whether or not it's 3 months or 6 months. Remember, HR's got to go on a quarter. Okay? A pause will likely create an increase in your projected cost because of that ramp-up time. If you decide to go with a systems integrator, I guarantee you they're going to want some contingency payments. And that will knock your dollars up. Okay? And then if you're going to treat budget prep as a separate follow-on project, if you don't include it with the scope of what you're trying to do, whether you call it phase 1 and phase 2, that's up to you. You're probably going to lose some economies of scale. So if you ramp up and start the budget prep thing as a separate and distinct project, you're probably going to be paying more than if you were just including it as part of the project. Does that make sense? And then governance should not be part of the pause. You shouldn't pause your governance. You need to keep it going. It's a little bit late. I mean, the pause ends in a week or so. But okay?
Well, next month's report should be interesting because by that time we should have this committee back
That's correct.
and know which way we're heading.
That's correct. Next month, it'll be next month. I'm sure it'll be all about, well, how long is it going to take? What's it going to cost? because we will, at least we'll know, theoretically, we would know.
Well, the pause will be over with and hopefully.
Theoretically.
Mr.
Well,
Steele?
the longer you wait on this, the more things change, because life's going on.
Mhm.
Technology is changing, needs are changing, people are changing, and you need to get it done. And it's really hard to get it done. You know, how hard is it to get in a car that's moving down the highway? And it's hard.
That's
Good luck.
absolutely correct, and one of the hardest positions that I think that the administration is going to have to take. This hasn't been discussed yet. Is once you finish that blueprint, that is your design. Okay? That is your design. So whoever decides how long it takes and how much it's going to cost is going to be based on that.
Yeah.
And then the administration is going to have to say, well, guess what? Unless there's some federal requirement or some state requirement that comes up that changes things, that's the design. That's what's going to get implemented. You've got to take that position so you can go forward. Otherwise, you got a moving target. You know, and you guys have experienced that for several years now as things change. Absolutely they do. Not only do they change over 4 years, think about what's changed for you. Oh, I have a different version of SAP. Oh, they have a different way of doing the database. You know, that's changed, but that wouldn't have been the case 4 years ago. It is now. Absolutely.
Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, it's a little bit troubling that we're still finding areas that we haven't even started on yet. That's hard to believe. I mean, I don't know anything about this, so I never would have found it either. But one of the consultants would have thought of that before now.
Well, I think we've heard it before. It's just we
Ms. Gray Jackson?
didn't turn it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to hear what Alden has to say in regard to the recommendations that were made. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Alden?
As far as recommendations, which,
Well, that Zig has made.
Zig made some recommendations.
well, certainly, the governance part we talked about a lot, and I think the committees, we're certainly going to be getting them going, but I think it's been hard with the pause. I do somehow agree that, some of these things are beneficial to keep moving on, and we have been, as an internal group, I think, moving on these things, maybe not communicating it to the entire functional committee, which I plan on doing today. We're starting that back up. The executive committee, we're going to be doing that. I think we're trying to also identify what the roles are of those committees, and we're readjusting them a little bit as we have a new set of administration, a new team on this. I do not disagree with the fact that the pause is going to affect the blueprinting. I'm very consistent with, I think, with what Zig said as far as the timeline. I'm doing everything I possibly can to minimize the ramp up, and we're doing a lot of other planning at this point in time as well, and even some items that Zig didn't mention in his presentation, because those all take time, energy, and money downstream, and I'm really trying to get those things dealt with. I'm the one who pushed the committee to make a lot of recommendations as well on a lot of these issues, because I think it's a very good opportunity to get a third party to take a stance. I mean, I have an opinion on every single one of those things, but I wanted them as well to analyze it and review it, because I think a consensus is always better than one person. So we're going to try to, I think, they're going to meet their timeline. We're going to move as fast as we possibly can towards the direction that the administration chooses. I made some comments yesterday about some things that we're trying to ramp up and tie up as well to minimize as much cost as possible, because we're very concerned about that. We're trying to minimize them where we can. We're just dropped into this thing, and we're going to do that. And we're also, I think, identifying all the core areas that need to be done and dealt with, and at least communicating that out there to everybody. It may not be good news, but it's news that we want to make sure we're always going to tell the truth. And this is what we're going to be sharing with you, the cost, the timeline, the reality, why we need it, and trying to at least give a good explanation of that the success of the project is going to be all of these things included, not just that. And then as a side, we are absolutely working on, the integrator side of what the blueprinting is done. That is something that's going on right as we speak right now on what our options are. So we're not going to wait until blueprinting and then figure out what the next stages are. We're going to know well in advance of that. So I think I'm pretty concise with what Zig had said here, that we are moving forward. And as I mentioned, we're also trying to get some blueprinting done as we're currently speaking. So all of these areas are going, as I mentioned earlier, we've taken a pause, but we have not stopped. And we are actually doing a tremendous amount of work behind the scenes in a variety of different areas. And that's only going to pick up here in the next week or two. When the committee's done and the report comes out, that's kind of like hopefully the go button again. And then we've really got a lot going on.
Anything, Tim?
I don't know if it's appropriate, but in terms of the space that we have rented, the apartments we have rented, all those things, there's a cost to shutting those down, but
We can't shut them down.
We can't shut them down if we're going forward.
We have leases through the early part of December and leases
Yeah.
through the end part of December. Now, as we go into the winter months here, we'll have more flexibility with hotel rooms, which are cheaper, and we will certainly be working on that. And when we get going on this again, we're going to be back with a whole lot of consultants doing blueprinting. I mean, we were at 24, 27. It's going to be 30. I mean, there were even areas we hadn't even started yet. So it's going to be a lot of people. So to the greatest degree possible, all costs is being looked at. And as I mentioned yesterday, we're revising the travel policy to make sure that we're tightening up as well, just in advance of that.
And Zig, if you need work sessions for the assembly, just let myself or LV know, and we'll set them up. If you need 3 or 4, we can set them up. I just want to make sure we've got constant communication
You said Zig.
between the administration and you.
You said Zig.
You said
Sorry, Alden.
Okay.
If you need work sessions, we're more than happy to set them up, okay?
We're
Because I'd rather the assembly know what's going on than say we weren't told what was happening. And thank you for your report, Zig. Appreciate it.
Charlie, welcome, sir.
Any other questions? Anything, LB?
No, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
This meeting's adjourned. Thanks for being here.